I'm going to introduce our first speaker, plenary speaker, is Dr. Sarah Ryan. Sarah is the Professor of Social Care at Manchester Metropolitan University, and her research focuses on learning disability and autism. She told me that before 2013, she was a quiet campaigner, but since the tragic death of her son, Connor Sparrowhawk, in 2013, she's been a much more active campaigner. She'll be talking about research practice and impropriety and the Independent Guide to Quality Care for Autistic People. So Sarah, I hope you're there, and I'll pass over to you.
I feel very honoured to be invited to speak here. So I'm just going to speak for about 15 minutes and I've got no slides. I'm going to read a script, which is unusual for me, but quite liberating. So on August the 25th, UK headline news was made around the start of a study called Spectrum 10K, led by Simon Baron-Cohen. He said on BBC News there was an urgent need to better understand autism, while the Cambridge University press release quoted him as stating that Spectrum 10K hopes to answer questions such as why some autistic people have epilepsy or poor mental health outcomes, and others do not. The study design didn't make clear how collecting these samples would achieve this, or indeed provide other information or reassurance around data protection and storage, the potential commercialisation of the data collected, and what the actual aims of the project were. There was a celebratory feel to the launch of this project on the BBC News and other news channels, and its potential, leaving the British public to again be fed the line that the answer to sorting this problem called autism lay in genetic research. It's not about eugenics, claimed the Spectrum 10K team with mock horror. Oh yes it is, replied the autistic community and their allies en masse. Social media went into overdrive, and with some digging, research, cutting commentary and good media coverage, the project has since been halted as Baron-Cohen and team apparently conduct retrospective co-design work with autistic people. There are two key points here for me. First, the power, dignity and collective strength of the responses generated by the autistic community and its allies. And second, the impropriety and ignorance of the research team led by an internationally renowned professor of autism. As a researcher who works with autistic people and people with learning disabilities, I want to focus on the latter point here in discussing the National Autistic Task Force Guide, while acknowledging with respect and awe the work that went into the campaign to halt the Spectrum 10K project. On Tuesday, the findings of an Australian-based randomised control trial investigating the effect of changing the way parents respond to their babies who are showing early signs of being autistic was published. The findings again made headline news on the BBC and various mainstream newspapers, as authors claimed it did make a difference. Once again, there was no engagement by presenters, journalists or commentators with the study design, reliability or robustness. Both these projects are underpinned by assumptions and beliefs which are in direct contradiction to the key elements of quality care outlined in the Task Force Guide. The National Autistic Task Force, run and managed by autistic people, was established 3 years ago, as Ian's just touched upon, building on the earlier work of the National Autistic Project. This work remains essential because of a lack of change in autistic people's lives and well-being, despite government legislation, policy and guidance. The guide is a comprehensive, clear, well signposted and evidence map to help care providers, support workers, commissioners, local authorities and regulators learn to better understand, work with and support autistic people to lead good lives. It offers key points providers can do, key points they can undertake, followed by an unpacking of the evidence and suggestions for improving practice. Now I want to step back a bit for a moment to childhood. The idea that autism can be headed off early with some enhanced parenting skills generates a strong message that autism is something to be avoided. As a parent with no previous experience of autism, I know how persuasive and seductive these difference-erasing narratives can be. 25 years on from when I was holding a cheeky top with the chubbiest cheeks and a joyful delight in lining up die-cast buses, it is shocking that research continues to be underpinned by these eugenic-stained narratives. This quest to erase rather than better understand is a form of soft eugenics, and the ease with which the Australian study was headlined by the BBC and other popular media outlets suggests we are not much further forward in terms of accepting and celebrating difference, and supporting positive autistic identity, a key element in the guide. The forensic lens of the pre and early diagnostic processes often create concern, sadness and distress for parents at a time in which babies and young children should be receiving the most loving and supporting parenting, regardless of whether or not they are autistic. I felt anger and sadness at the number of years it took me to understand that there was nothing wrong with Connor, my son, and how that time could have been so much better lived and used if we had been supported to understand him better. We needed coaxing and coaching to recognise the tyranny of normality and ableism in a maelstrom of baby measurements, metrics and apparent healthcare. Riffing off Damien Milton's double empathy problem, I think autistic babies and children can too often experience a bewildering and incomprehensible double whammy problem with their main caregivers, the people who love them off the planet, misunderstanding them and falling down too many rabbit holes of cure, treatment and normality seeking. Sorry. Studies like Whitehall et al. Are part of the academic and wider machinery, sustaining views that should have been long discounted and discredited. The role of academics and the assumptions that underpin our research is too often a serious issue here. It's not just academics, of course, as we have seen from the examples discussed above. The funding bodies who read these applications, the peer reviewers who are offering academic expertise in judging and reviewing these proposals to see if they're sound, worthwhile, important and well designed. Ethics committees, again, it's incomprehensible to me that the Spectrum Tenge study passed an ethics committee, having been on the sharp end of ethics committees' comments in the past for minor indiscretions compared to the study design of Simon Baron-Cohen's project. All bodies and pieces in the academic jigsaw work to the same deficit model, lacking critical engagement and knowledge apparently needed to ask key questions of research proposals or ethics applications in this area. This is clearly deeply problematic. There have been attempts to identify research priorities for autistic people, most recently by Roche et al., who systematically reviewed 7 articles focusing on this. The authors note the importance of research that results in change in people's lives, and research across the life course. The importance of a diverse set of autistic people involved in priority setting was seen as imperative. Without this common sense involvement and collaboration, research will continue to miss the point in dangerous ways. Writing this, the other evening, my brain was shouting, "Stop fanning around in Petri dishes while people's lives are shit." Another key element in the task force guide is autonomy. And it talks about proxy decision makers who are not usually autistic themselves, making decisions in terms of what autistic people lack. This again resonates within the research in this field. Researchers make decisions about what research is important, what questions to ask, and run with this, acting as proxy research decision makers for people they don't know or understand too often. Researchers also too often don't know what a good autistic life is like, or what values are important to particular autistic people. This proxy research decision-making extends beyond the research person to their family members, as we see paper after paper focusing on the impact of having an autistic sibling, for example, on people's lives, the burden, the accompanying bullying, or somehow missing out on an aspect of childhood because of their unruly, in a positive way, sister, brother, or sibling. A nod here to Pavlopoulou and Dimitrio's wonderful 2019 sibling study, I Don't Live with Autism, I Live with My Sister. And when I was doing some research for a recent book I published, I had to go through pages of Google search to find an article that didn't have sibling burden impact in the title. The research is too often framed negatively. And again, if your research is framed with a negative question and you go out and you speak to people or you do a survey, then you are going to find negative. You're going to rootle it out somehow. But by doing that, you're erasing the positive and the joy and the brilliance that people bring to family lives, like other family members. A further related key point researchers could take from the Task Force Guide is around how a good service for autistic people recognises and respects autistic norms and perspectives, and does not assume that what is normal for non-autistic people is necessarily best for autistic people. And I can remember once I was enlightened with Connor, and I used to write my blog, My Daft Life, about our funny family life. I used to call Connor my unlikely ethnographer because he offered such an insight into what we were doing and why we were doing it. And he offered so many sort of the richest reflections about everyday life that the rest of us were completely oblivious to, and we couldn't see it. And I think that too often researchers are going in and stamping over that ethnographic expertise or that insight and crushing it with their own questions and ableist assumptions. So this again is a key failing for researchers, even though social scientists apparently steeped in reflexivity. The layers of assumptions and judgments that pervade much research in this area, or many areas of research focusing on marginalised groups more widely, need addressing, and this will only happen when non-autistic researchers start to engage properly with autistic people as active and democratically positioned collaborators with flexible research methods, time and individual attention paid to incorporate different communication styles. Now, the final point I want to make about the non-autistic researchers' engagement with autistic people, either as research collaborators, co-researchers or research participants, is the duty of care, which is very clear in the Task Force Guide in relation to support. I quote from the guide, "The very nature of autism leaves people exposed to a much higher risk of stress from external demands and a more frequent and severe experience of it. Our research endeavours, whether underpinned by a genuine attempt to generate change in people's lives, to build our careers and climb up the academic ladder, or simply to do a paid job within working hours, should never ever generate distress in the people our research is about." While my initial concerns about the Spectrum 10K study stemmed from a poor research design and rationale and a baffling ethics committee approval, it was the obvious and intense distress it was causing autistic people, including those who were actively trying to stop the project, that is unacceptable. I think too often researchers are so disconnected from the people they are researching, which is evidenced in the questions chosen, the methods used, the approach, the framing and the outputs, that they are too far to realise or recognise that they may be generating distress in people's lives. And I think, again, for me, this comes back to ethics committees and better understanding people, which needs to happen through hanging out with people and working with people rather than working on them. So, in conclusion, I think the guide is a compelling, comprehensive, clear and powerful resource for those who provide care and work with autistic people and their families. I found it an absorbing read because it was so comprehensive and it seemed to cover everything and so much more than I would expect to be in there. And I found it very gently challenging of a lot of what is taken for granted. And so I think the potential for the guide to have impact, if people receive it with the intention it's been produced and the work that's got into it, it should have impact. I think it also has reach beyond the immediate focus on care providers to offer insight and learning in many other areas. And as a starter, there's a space to develop a spin-off guide for researchers in this field, something that is clearly needed. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. Sorry I had a wobble in the middle. And I will hand back to Ian.